Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our EUROCONTROL Stakeholder Forum technical webinar. Our topic today is flexible use of airspace. The airspace management concept intrinsically linked to civil-military cooperation in aviation. We will be exploring today the evolution of the concept based on changing and evolving civil and military requirements for using the airspace. My name is Remus Lăcătuș. I am an ATM expert in the Civil Military Cooperation Division of EUROCONTROL, and it's a great pleasure to me to fulfill the role of moderator today for the panel discussions. We have the concept of flexible use of airspace in operations for nearly 3 decades now. So one may ask, why do we need a fresh approach to it? Why do we need to discuss about its evolution as far as the concept has seen a constantly and a global evolution? Firstly, it is about the changing landscape of the aviation ecosystem. The evolution in terms of new entrants, using higher airspace operations, U-space operations. Next is about technology, cutting-edge technology for fighter weapon systems, for aviation assets in general, and nevertheless is the need to enhance civil-military cooperation in response to crisis, in response to civil crisis, and also to military crisis. And maybe the best example of enhancing this cooperation is offered nowadays by the ongoing conflict at the eastern borders of Europe, with a clear insight on what needs the enhancement of civil-military cooperation in one side to ensure a safety response to crisis, but also to allow civil aviation to continue the efficiency of their operations. The context was very well recognized last June when EUROCONTROL organized, in collaboration with ICAO, the first Global Civil-Military Aviation Summit. Top civil and military aviation leaders came together to discuss how to evolve civil-military cooperation in aviation in order to ensure that globally the aviation system can meet with the requirements of efficiency, the requirements of safety, security, but also the requirements and the increasing requirements in environmental sustainability to both civil and military users. And the focus of the summit this time for the first edition was on the flexible use of airspace. The summit underscored the important role of the flexible use of airspace, emphasizing that is not a discretionary measure, is not a luxury, but it is a necessity. It is a necessity to both users. It is intrinsically linked to civil-military cooperation, and it is very important to advance it in order to cope with future requirements. What we do today is to try to build upon the discussions during the summit and to try to translate the insights of our leaders into some concrete operational and technical measures. To that, we have lined up 4 speakers, well-known experts, and please allow me to introduce them to you. I will welcome Colonel Christoph Hindermann, who is responsible for the military traffic within the Ministry of Defense of the Armed Forces in France. Next, Jacek Wirwicz. He is the head of airspace management unit in the Polish Air Navigation Service provider, PANSA. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Martin. He is the Chief Air Traffic Services Officer in the Irish Air Corps, and Álvaro Ramos del Rio, expert in airspace management system, Civil Military Cooperation Division, EUROCONTROL. Together, they will explore and they will discuss on the following topics related to civil military cooperation and the flexible use of airspace. So first, they will address the day-to-day management of the airspace and of the flexible use of airspace, and what could a civil military cooperation, the collaborative decision-making could do in order to ensure safe, secure, and efficient operations for both civil and military users. Next, they will talk about how to align to the changing civil and military needs to use the airspace, specifically with regards to the flexibility and the dynamicity of the processes, with an emphasis on what is the impact of conflicts into the usage of airspace. The third topic is about the civil side of the flexible use of airspace. Military usually claim they do a lot of effort to ensure flexibility and dynamicity, and they expect the civil side to use it efficiently, to take upon on what FUA makes available. And that is about the civil use of available and released airspace, by also highlighting what could be the obstacles to improve that take up on the FUA outcomes. And nevertheless, we are going to hear some discussions about the introduction of digitalization and automation in airspace management support systems. Each of the panelists will start to introduce the topic, to make a short presentation, and to share their perspectives on the topics presented. Following to those introductions, I will then open the floor to you, the participants to this webinar, for your questions and answers. We have already received a significant number of questions. We will try to answer them, and also those coming during our live session. You can use the Q&A function to send us your questions, and if you have troubles with that facility, then please use the chat function to send us your questions. We are keen to receive them and to try to answer them. Without any further ado, I will give the floor to our speakers, and I will kindly invite Christophe to start.
Thank you very much, Remus. The first question is how military airspace requirements and priorities for the day-to-day training evolve with new aircraft and weapon system and new entrants. We will talk about air pass and higher airspace operations. I think first it's very important to precise the current context. We are now facing the fifth generation of fighters. For some example, F-35 or the latest version of the Rafale is the F-4 version. For an efficient training, they require larger areas. Roughly, it's 150 up to 80 nautical miles for the Rafale F-4, and for F-35, it's more going to 200 up to 150 nautical miles. Why do we need this larger area? Because these fighters have an increased range, radar, especially weapon system performance, and so we have to tackle this issue. The new missions are also more complex. Before it was roughly more between 2 and 4 aircraft. Now a current mission is between 8 and 10 fighters, so it requires a larger area. The area that we need must also have an altitude ranges that is no longer limited to high and medium altitude, because when we are working in military missions, we have to fulfill the entire spectrums of the military missions. And so it means a joint approach with guys from the Navy, the Army, and Special Forces. So we have to go from the ground to unlimited. Some countries achieve to put in place some areas. It's the case in France. We have a new concept which is called New Weapons Training Areas. We call it ZINA in France. Somebody heard about them. And the first one was implemented in December 2019 for a 3-year trial, and she's now a permanent area since December 2022. We have several areas. At the end, 6 areas are expected to cover the French need. And the 5th one is in trial since 1 month now and was tested yesterday for the 2nd time successfully in the southwest part of France. The implementation of such areas were really very big, required a very huge work and in a very close cooperation with our civil partners. You cannot implement such areas when you're working alone in your area. It's very essential to work at strategic level, because the current situation with operative is not working, and to work at high level politics. In terms of design, airspace management, you have to find the best location very far away when possible from the biggest civil flows, and you have to check the best time frame when the impact on civil flows is the lowest one. But implement such areas very complicated, especially for small countries like Switzerland or Belgium. We are working with them, and the expected area covers roughly the entire country size. Furthermore, there's a 6th generation class of fighter which will arrive and enter into service in the 2030s. We have some projects, they are well known, like Tempest for France, Germany, and Spain. It's called FCAS, Future Combat Air System, and we have also some projects in the United States, FAX6 and NGAT. These new generation fighters has some characteristics. The first one, advanced digital capabilities. They are networking among each other and they require very big areas to make it very efficient. Second characteristic, it will be hybrid missions. You will have at the same times in the air both manned and unmanned assets. You will also have advanced engines that will be able to cruise economically very slowly, but also to deliver high thrust and very high thrust to go perhaps to Mach 3, Mach 4 when needed. They will have increased range of standoff weapons beyond visual range, very more than today. And potentially in the future, they will use also directed energy weapons like laser. So to fulfill then these requirements, these very new requirements, we will need bigger area than today, very bigger one. For some example, when I have discussed with the experts for the French Air Force, the requirement will be a square of 300 up to 300 nautical miles, going from surface to flight level 600. That means 2 times bigger than our Xena. That's a nightmare to put them in place. And even with a strong collaborative decision-making process and a mature flexible use of airspace process, the impact on civil flows will be very high and probably hardly acceptable for them. So we have to find solutions. At the second step, at 4D level, the current 1.5 hour of playtime will probably remain the same because we cannot play too long in missions. But we will, the new wishes will probably require a kind of priority. If you have complex missions, we cannot tackle with last time changes. So when these areas are put in place, we have to have priority on them. It's also what also changed, and you can see it since 1 year now, is the nature of the training. With the conflict in Ukraine, the people remember that a conflict between 2 countries is even possible again. And so we have new kinds of exercises that are called high intensity exercises. It was the case with Orion exercises in France in 2023 and also in Germany with Air Defender. It was just the 2 biggest exercises in the 3 last decades. And so we have to go and find solutions. But for that part, as they are limited in time, it's more easy to implement them. The requirement that I have spoken just before is a permanent one. I don't want to go more into details for this exercise, but it will come. And at the end, to tackle the focus on airpass and HIOs, for the moment, it's not really a factor regarding our requirements. For the airpass, it's very limited to the low-level training. In France, we have a dedicated network to train, so it will be completely forbidden to do airpass to go inside these areas, but it's more a problem with the liberty and freedom on air safety in the very low levels. HIOs, higher airspace operation, will not be an issue because we consider that only few missions will be done every month. So with a good CDM process and a good cooperation between civil military at national and European level, this higher airspace operation will be probably tackled. And at the end, to sum up, I think I'm really convinced that in the future, tackle this new military requirement cannot be tackled at national level. This area will be very too big, and so the really future is an international cooperation at bilateral, trilateral, multilateral level to find a big area able to fulfill the requirements of several countries. And that's it for my intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christophe. Indeed, you have listed plenty of challenges, and obviously the new generation of fighter will put a lot of pressure on the airspace management processes. And especially very important to me, you mentioned civil-military collaborative decision-making, maybe a new system of priorities that could help this collaborative process needs to be at the core of the future developments. Thank you very much again, Christophe. And Jacek, please, the floor is yours.
So first of all, good afternoon to all of you. So just a quick words about me. So for the recent 20 years, I've been involved in operational implementation of EUROCONTROL Flexible Use of Airspace concept in Poland. So I am the head of Airspace Management Cell, which is a joint civil-military unit of Panzer and Polish Armed Forces. UNIS is responsible for practical and tactical airspace management in coordination with airspace users. The unit actually is just behind me in a frozen version. So the topic assigned to me was alignment to changing civil and military needs towards a more flexible and dynamic airspace planning and use, with the emphasis on the areas impacted by the conflicts. So how the flexible use of airspace concept works, especially in the crisis situation like we have right now. Let me share with you with some experience we already gathered as a country with military conflict near the border. The biggest challenge, especially at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, almost daily, was the need first to create and next to activate the temporary ad hoc areas needed to secure military missions. It required constant modifications of airspace design, including the military structures, and to minimize negative impact on civilian traffic. Honestly, it was a real challenge to share this information daily with all the interested stakeholders, for instance, airspace users, ATC units, and of course, network manager. Based on agreed European standards, we normally do this via the AUP publications, where there are included all the restrictions caused by the military activities. Unfortunately, this time it was not so easy, mostly due to dynamicity of changes. However, thanks to effective and also creative application of advanced flexible use of airspace concept principles, we managed to survive since the very beginning of the crisis situation. So just to prove it, let me give you some data just to see how was the situation. So the number of military operations 2022 versus 2021 doubled since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. If we compared it with 2019, the increase reached over above 200%. Whoa. In May 2022, 94% of delays in our FIR were caused by the war in Ukraine. But already next month, in June, the number dropped to 85%. In the meantime, of course, we have taken many steps also by creative use of FUA concept assumptions to minimize impact of military operations. So, but coming back a bit a few years ago, luckily for us, new governmental regulations regarding Polish airspace with respect to advanced flexible use of airspace principles were introduced in our country. It allowed us to implement in operations a more flexible and dynamic approach, especially in respect of restricted and danger areas management. They can be requested only by strictly defined state institutions, so-called agency-approved military, police, for later publication via AUP and SNOTAM on the ongoing basis, also for emergency situations. Of course, in parallel, we have taken an action in cooperation with our Civil Aviation Authority to obtain approval for deviation from ICAO regulations regarding our airspace, later published in our AIP. Also, the fact that the FUA principles were implemented years ago in whole Polish FIR, both in control and uncontrolled airspace helps us a lot. It allows us to concentrate all permanent and temporary restrictions in one place, which is the airspace use plan. It is very beneficial for users, also from the general aviation perspective. It enables us to disseminate a full package of information via AUP and updated AUP process about all restrictions in our flight information regions to stakeholders, including those dynamic and temporary nature, also available on dedicated www portal. It is worth mentioning that recent advanced flexible use of airspace inventions, in example, implementation of new type of airspace structure, so-called dynamic non-standard planning zones affecting GAT traffic flows, managed through airspace use plan, allowed us to isolate civilian-controlled air traffic in the vicinity of intense military activity. Now, short comment on technical issues during this crisis situation. So the significant challenge has been to provide and share information on dynamically implemented restricted areas with network management system due to technical constraints. To be more precise, the network manager database, so-called CAGD, is normally updated only during the AIRAC cycle due to its sensitive technical limitations. Unfortunately for us, the conflict on our eastern border did not follow the AIRAC cycle. Most of the areas were implemented outside of it. Therefore, especially at the beginning of the conflict, we had to deal with those ad hoc areas tactically by ourselves, taking into account the additional restrictions caused by the new areas. However, this technical issue will be eliminated together with the implementation of the new network manager system, which is very important due to both, first of all, increase of military requirements and not so stable like it used to be political situation in our region. Well, finally, the whole advanced flexible use of airspace process I'm talking about right now is carried out in a very close consultation with the military side at every stage, which is in our case not particularly difficult because in our airspace management cell unit is a joint civil-military unit responsible for tactical and, which is important, tactical airspace management. We use common operational manuals and, importantly, the same airspace management system support already third generation, located not only in our airspace management cell, but also at all the military units involved in airspace management process. Thank you. That's all from my side.
Great. Thank you very much, Jacek. Indeed, I take out of your speech two keywords, dynamicity and flexibility. Honestly, I like very much what you said about the advanced flexible use of airspace and the innovative solutions you put in place. And I think that the key requirement to that is information exchange between civil and military users, so that to be able to be, as you said, inventive in adapting processes and structures to the changing needs. And the changing needs indeed does not really follow IRAC cycles. I fully agree with you. Thank you very much, Jacek. And I switch now the floor to Ray. Please, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much, Rimas, and thank you for asking me to speak. And I suppose kind of I'll echo your comment there about the flexible use of airspace shortly coming up on 30 years of operation, because very often we associate it with the Regulation 2150 of 2005. But of course, the concept of the continuum of airspace dates back to 1996 and the EUROCONTROL concept. And I remember back in 1998 trying to write it into civil military coordination procedures in Ireland. So we have come a long way, and we've built up a lot of experience in Europe in terms of using airspace flexibly. And I suppose if we look at airspace today versus and how it's used versus how it was back in the early to mid 90s and late 90s, there's completely different approach. I suppose kind of it became obvious also that when we look at flexible use of airspace, we need to consider both the supply side of the equation and the demand side of the equation. And two very, in its early days, perhaps the focus has been the use of, or the measurement of, how the military have been making available airspace, and that has been the metric that has been looked at. But very often we haven't necessarily looked at how the airspace is actually used, that is being released or is otherwise available, which perhaps hasn't actually been booked. And I think it's really important when we look at airspace capacity and look at means to use airspace, that the focus is on the word use and how that airspace is being used. And during, I suppose, kind of our experience of FUA, we probably on the military side have seen cases where perhaps the airspace that has been released, or the airspace that has been made available or hasn't been booked, hasn't actually been used. And certainly Eurocontrol and CMC, the Civil Military Cooperation Division, and Remus and the staff have created and provided some excellent heat maps which demonstrate the issue and the problem that we need to address, and that is that very often the airspace, regardless of the military status, when you look at a heat map of all the flight plans that have been filed, very often the heat map indicates that the flight plans are avoiding the military airspace. And to a certain extent, this is almost regardless of whether the airspace is active or not. And this is most obvious in situations where you compare the heat maps of flight plans filed from the weekend versus the weekday operations. And generally, the weekend operations, flight operations, are against a backdrop of almost no military activity. So military do not train during the weekday. So this has been a useful and very, very informative piece of research that that CMC have provided. And on the foot of that, we've tried to look at kind of what are the barriers that have been that may prevent airlines, or probably more importantly, aircraft operators, which could include airlines, but also operators operating on behalf of airlines, the BizJet community, and also the military operating as GAT. What prevents us using that airspace as aircraft operators? And I suppose kind of when we look at what was actually found, we found a number of issues perhaps that were acting as barriers, and sometimes it can be looked at kind of as a binary thing. It's a military issue, or it's a civil issue as such, or an airline or aircraft operator. What we found is that it's a much more nuanced issue in terms of the barriers to use of flexible use of airspace. And it ranges in topics from systems and technology, and we look at advances in technology into the future, but also, are we using and matching the technologies that we have of the past to optimize our use of them? There are, of course, issues with the aircraft operators, which may relate to how their business operation is working, or indeed the pressures of flight operations offices and the requirement to deal with the urgent and important, rather than looking at reopening flight plans that will take perhaps 15 minutes to modify in a single instance. You know, there are real pressures within the flight operations systems and procedures that are of importance. There are undoubtedly civil military aspects, and one, of course, is kind of that very often military aircraft, for example, operating as GAT, will be operating under a diplomatic clearance, which again ties them to particular routes and prevents the use of FUA in occasions. And likewise, sometimes there may be civil military arrangements that aren't transparent to the users and effectively can't be taken advantage of. We also have identified issues in terms of the network manager processes and procedures, and particularly the question of refiling or being seen as late filing of the flight plan. And sometimes the operator can be penalised for using the latest airspace availability. We also have identified regulatory issues and environmental issues that also prevent the operators from using the airspace. So very often, what we have discovered actually is that kind of it isn't a case very often that the operators don't wish to use the airspace. In some cases, they can't use the airspace. So I suppose what was really clear to us from study that was carried out was that effectively FUA is well appreciated, and I think we heard the dynamicity, we heard about the flexibility to change and to the level 3 as we have it at the moment, but also we have heard about the importance of the strategic level 1 in terms of setting the ground rules and ensuring that there is a well understood ability to deal with kind of what happens at the level 2 and level 3 elements. We probably focused very much, and kind of in terms of the metrics that we have, is what happens at level 2. And I suppose that's the area where we need to perhaps increase our work to ensure the predictability of the airspace. And predictability is probably a key thing as we go forward, and ensuring that we can predict what is likely to happen, that we match the flight plans to the available airspace, and then we match the routes that are actually flown to the flight plans. So that I'll leave over and hand back to you, Remus. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ray. To me, it's really amazing to see a military with such a deep knowledge on the civil problems to take up on the FUA benefits. And indeed, I fully support what you say, that maybe the most expensive and initially effective way to improve the benefits of FUA on the civil side is to look at the processes we have in place and to identify what could be first the measures applied there to improve what means the input of FUA to civil flight planning. Thanks again, Ray. And finally, I give the floor to Alvaro, please.
Thank you, Remus. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor for me to be here today to discuss with you flexible use of airspace. As you probably understand at this point, managing airspace, being this a limited resource, is not really an easy task. Over the last 3 years, European aviation has been confronted with a lot of events that no one could have anticipated. We have discussed about the pandemic, the conflict that we are experiencing currently in Ukraine, and the economic crisis, to name a few. Despite all these factors, the traffic on the EUROCONTROL network has been recovering effectively. Flexible use of airspace, as already mentioned by the previous speakers, is a key tool. This allows to find acceptable solutions and to maximize the utilization of available airspace. The main principle is that airspace should be used flexibly to fulfill the needs of all users at all times. This maximizes the military mission effectiveness and also improves the overall network performance by minimizing delays and reducing the economic and environmental impact of air operations. The aim is always to be as civil as possible, but as military as necessary. Of course, system support is essential in this process. One of the key enablers are airspace management systems, which support the consistent application of FUA by allowing the integration of military needs in airspace plans, reducing the need for airspace restrictions. They also allow effective collaborative decision-making and information sharing above all involved actors, ensuring that the correct airspace picture is shared not only between the national, civil, and military users, but also at international level. This helps, of course, to conduct effective cross-border operations. Civil military support systems, such as LARA, CIMAC, or PRISMIL, which are provided today by EUROCONTROL to our member states, have been successfully implemented by many nations, and this allows for a systematic approach to civil-military cooperation. These are much more than pieces of software. They are the basis for new relationships between the civil and the military ATM personnel, which are based on trust and data sharing. Local systems, like the case of Poland, have also been developed by nations to fulfill this need. The advantage of tools like this is that it provides military airspace users with ready-to-go systems, and that allows coordination between the military units and the central military airspace management centers. For example, LARA is implemented in Belgium in all military units, including Air Force squadrons and army shooting ranges, which are presented with an automatic booking system, so that each operating center can coordinate not only between themselves, but also with the central command and decide who has priority. The system is also connected to the civil service providers and the network manager, so that the information is exchanged in real time, allowing for an effective cross-border decision and CDM process to take place. That improves, of course, the safety of operations based on the exchange of accurate data. EUROCONTROL, over the last 30 years, has built a lot of experience, helping to deploy the FUA concept in Europe, where the concept is quite mature. This is also recognized as an important element to introduce FUA in other parts of the world. Each country has very different civil-military arrangement, with different relationships between the main stakeholders. In Europe, many of these has already been overcome. It has taken time and the process is really complex. For instance, here we base our implementation on clear specifications and regulations set by the European Union, whereas for the rest of the world, ICAO has helped in the use of the document 18080, the Manual on Civil-Military Cooperation, which provides guidance on the topic. Today, we are in an era of great technological innovation. It's not just in the world of air traffic management. Under the guidance of ICAO, there are major modernization programs, such as trajectory-based operations, SWIM, and FFIs, which are currently being implemented at the global level. This will allow real-time information shared by everyone so that optimized flight routes can be planned from departure to arrival, taking into account wind, weather, and airspace availability, to be shared seamlessly across all involved partners. We have also seen today the example of full integration of systems, like in the case of Panzer, to the extent that sharing the same ATM system across civil and military partners is bringing outstanding benefit to the whole aviation community. However, we must note as well that European airspace remains fragmented in terms of airspace organization and provision of support services. Communication, navigation, and surveillance systems for ATM and related support services are also duplicated. This, unfortunately, results in a limited capacity being available, lack of common 4D trajectory optimization, frequency saturation on the radio, limited automation support, limited data sharing, and lack of interoperability, not only between air navigation service providers, but also between military organizations, airspace users, and airports. Looking at the future, the changing security environment in Europe, which today we are referring to as the new normal, will also require more innovative and ambitious cooperation between the civil and the military aviation communities. The conflict in Ukraine was an important wake-up call for politicians to invest in the military. We have witnessed, as in the case of Poland, an increase in military activities based on an intensified program of collective defense and deterrence. This is done daily and sometimes with very short notice. Recent air operations also highlight the growing importance of cross-border collaboration, which is necessary not only for training, but also for rapid deployment of forces in European airspace. If we take a look at fifth-generation fighters and modern weapon systems, they will require indeed bigger airspaces than those available today to fulfill the training requirements due to a multiple factor. But just to give you a reference, more than 600 F-35s will operate in Europe by 2030, and we need to accommodate those with the growing expected level of traffic. Even though many missions can be still performed in a simulated environment that helps a lot for sustainability, it's important to note that the concept of train as you fight requires also the conduct of training in real environment to achieve the desired combat readiness. New entrants, high-altitude endurance platforms, hypersonic platforms, ARPAs, space launches are also challenges that we are experiencing today that will require advanced systems to be put in place as soon as possible. Not to forget as well, sustainability. Climate change and rising environmental concerns are also key challenges that will be faced by all aviation partners. That's why it's clear that with new entrants and new requirements, new technologies, together with the global crisis that we experience, we need to take a closer look at how ASM will be done in the future and what the required system support will it be in order to accommodate all those needs. Thank you, Remus.
I thank you very much, Alvaro, for your intervention. Indeed, the usage of systems with appropriate technology, I think, will be key to be able to support solving the future complexity in airspace management processes and also the complexity of interactions between the multiple actors involved when it comes to cross-border operations. With this, I think we conclude the first session of our webinar. I thank again very much to our speakers. We got, I think, a lot of insights from them with regards to operational and technical aspects for evolving the flexible use of airspace. And now it's time to pass to the next one, questions from our audience. And I will start with the first one, which is related to the impact of fifth generation of fighter airspace requirements. And I think it's a very, very interesting question. I quote even the assertion of Jean-Marie Lebout, who addressed this question to us. And he says that FUA may help alleviate the impact of large airspace requirements at national level. But what about solving this issue from a European perspective? And how could Eurocontrol be able to consider and coordinate these national military activities to reduce the overall impact at an acceptable level? Yeah. And I think that to answer this question, we need first to elaborate a bit on what means the impact of fifth generation of fighter requirements at European level. And I will kindly ask Christophe to continue to elaborate a bit. He explained to us during his speech, and maybe we can have additional details to that. And then I will ask Alvaro to address a bit the second part of the question concerning how Eurocontrol could support the states in order to find together solutions to have a European approach to solve the issues. Gentlemen.
Thank you very much. As I said before, the optimal requirement is a very big area from 300 nautical miles up to 300 and from ground to flight level 600. I think that even in a big country like France or Germany, it's just impossible at the national level to put such an area in place, because I made a little picture in my office and it's 50% of the French airspace. So that means that during 2 hours, you have to stop all civil activity over a country. It will be done for the Olympic Games, but not on a daily basis for the training. So I think that the opportunity to put this in place is to create a sign of a common area which can be used by several countries at cross-border level. And it's important to work together with all these countries to find the best design for the area, and the best way to manage this area in the 4D dimension. And it's clear that at the end, we have to work all together and with the network manager to find a kind of management, a CDM process, international CDM process, including the network manager to manage this area in the future. I don't see any solution in the core area of Europe. I talk about France especially.
Thank you, Christophe. Alvaro?
Well, the civil-military dimension of Eurocontrol is essential to this agency. F-35s or fifth-generation fighters are indeed introducing challenging requirements, but FUA, it's a concept which is used daily across Europe, including during the organization of big events involving a big amount of military aircraft requiring big chunks of airspace. I can give you the example of the Tactical Leadership Program, the TLP, which is finishing today in Spain, or Exercise Air Defender 2023, that was organized in Germany in June. In both cases, extensive planning and collaboration with the various national air navigation service providers, the different air forces, Eurocontrol, and the airlines have been proven to be critical for success. However, we have clear procedures in place that allow for coordinating big exercises and military events in our network, reducing the possible impact on civil flows. However, our work doesn't stop here. From a high-level perspective, Eurocontrol is also represented in European military arrangements. We have close coordination with military partners at the strategic and execution levels. For instance, since last year, we have a detachment of a Eurocontrol expert in the NATO Allied Air Command, AirCom in Ramstein, which is helping to coordinate, since the creation of the exercises, the potential impact on civil traffic. We also count with military liaison officers, our MILOs, in the Network Managers Operations Center, Those act as a liaison between the national military airspace managers and the network. From the operational perspective, some member states are already operating F-35s like Italy, where the platform was introduced in 2016 and will reach full operational capability by the end of this year. To cope with that, we had to invent innovative solutions like ASM scenarios that were introduced over the Adriatic Sea. These scenarios allow to book airspace according to predefined plans, ensuring that efficient air traffic flow and capacity measures can be put in place, reducing the possible impact of operations. Future concepts like dynamic mobile areas or dynamic airspace configuration will further enhance flexibility in the airspace planning process. In addition, airspace redesign activities may also have to take place to alleviate potential impact of those operations. Just to finish my intervention, also, we are addressing this issue from a technical point of view. EUROCONTROL just started to operate a new ops room and is investing in a major modernization program, which is called the INM program. This will radically renovate the systems used currently by the network manager. These new systems will allow the adoption of future concepts like 4D trajectory, high altitude operations, new entrants, and fifth generation fighter integration. At local level, EUROCONTROL also supports the implementation of interoperable systems that facilitate cross-border operations. Building up on what Christophe mentioned, we need collaboration, we need partnership across different nations, and that will only be facilitated using system support. We have also recently implemented in our network operational flight plans, OAT flight plans, that as from next year will allow also the exchange of military flight plan with the network manager, not only for GAT traffic, but also for OAT traffic. With this, I complete my intervention. I hope it was a complete answer. Thank you, Remus.
Thank you, Alvaro. I hope that your answer fulfills the expectation of our audience. And yeah, I see a question which is usually at the core of discussions concerning the sovereignty of airspace and the usage of cross-border areas. That's a live question coming from, I think you know, Leon Kremers. He is asking us about the impact of cross-border areas with a high frequency use on military mission effectiveness and the national value of the effectiveness of military missions. So the question is, do you agree the national sovereignty needs cannot be negotiated against civil network benefits, as readiness and military mission effectiveness are national values? I will ask our military colleagues to elaborate very shortly on these aspects related to military mission effectiveness and cross-border collaboration, especially Christophe, who can witness a very great collaboration with Germany in terms of cross-border airspaces, but also Ray with the very specifics of the airspace. Please, gentlemen.
Exactly. Cross-border area, I have a nice example because I have a project with Germany, and to fulfill this project and tackle all the sovereignty issues and the civil commercial issues, we have worked with both civil and military partners. It's a military project within the German Air Force, the French Air Force, but also we have worked with DSNA, which is the French ANSP, and with DFS. And the best issue to have no problems with the civilian that we will use in the future existing area. We will just use in the same time 2 areas located from each side of the boundary. That's called the TRA 22 in the northeast part of France and Tralauter in Germany. And for the civilian flows, there's no changing, but for the military it's very important because the area, the training area, will be 2 times bigger than the national one. And so the tackle, it's very covered. But the first topic is really a common willing at political level to work together in this issue. Finished.
What's your perspective, Ray?
Okay, I think it's very interesting, and one could probably discuss the matter for the next 48 hours and still never reach a conclusion. But I think the first thing to remember is that absolutely national needs and sovereign needs are very important, and we need to consider that the national needs and sovereign aspects may go beyond, we'll say, just the military requirements, but also enter into the political domain as well. And that's something that always has to be remembered, that there may be a political level also to be considered when you're looking at level 1 and what airspace strategy has been developed by a state. The second thing that is probably useful and more focused on the mission effectiveness is that, without a shadow of doubt, the ability of the military to operate effectively and to train effectively has to be, sacrosanct for that state. It needs its readiness there. And we sometimes see that kind of even in terms of platforms, when we share strategic assets, the assets are all fine when we don't need them, but it's when we need them and we're sharing that then it becomes a slight problem, because everybody needs it at the same time. So I think kind of the cross-border airspace is almost part of the solution into the future, but we also need to be very careful about kind of those sovereign aspects that are there, and also how do we support workups or at national level when we all need that same airspace, and what priority rules we apply, and is that going to actually meet our strategic needs? So that's it from me.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Let's continue picking up questions. So I see several questions related to U-Space operations, and trying to collate the requirements of those questions. I will kindly ask for Jacek to elaborate a bit on how could the impact of U-Space operations be alleviated from an airspace management and specifically flexible use of airspace and safety perspective.
Okay, so thank you very much. So, well, to me, the FUA concept is also helpful in this respect. So, based on our current experiences, many RPAS operations, depending, of course, on the type of RPAS and type of operations, can be performed like any other OAT manned aircraft in segregated airspace structures like TSA or TRA, and follow FUA assumptions and procedures. We as a country are a good example for that. So daily, to my experience, around 20% of airspace reservations published in AUP are used by RPAS. In parallel, PANSA is developing the new technologies and procedures to meet the demands of the rest of the drone community. Actually, already today, our airspace management system exchanges information with RPAS systems on planned and actual airspace use, essential from perspective all users and services, of course. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacek, and I kindly ask you to stay connected because I have a next question to you as well, coming from Eurico Brito, and that is related about the delays caused to airlines by the military activity. So specifically, the question is, what is the effect of civil-military agreements in flexible use of airspace in the progress of airline delays in recent times? And next, what are the main civil-military actions to be addressed by the day-to-day civil-military coordination and CDM to support optimization of airspace users, I assume, in order to reduce delays?
Okay, so frankly speaking, the impact of those civil-military agreements is huge. What is recommended, based on our experience, they should be made at all levels. I mean, government regulations, agreements between ministries of defense and ministry, and of course, civil-military institutions responsible for airspace management in the country. It really helps then to implement FUA principles to the maximum extent and then expect benefits. Also in terms of delays, because that was the question. So maybe some figures from our area. So according to EUROCONTROL statistics, Poland is the country with one of the highest number of restricted areas in Europe managed via AUP process. So in 2019, which is the most appropriate year to get a proper picture, that was before COVID, war in Ukraine, the number of hours of reserved areas was 160,000, resulting in 756 minutes of delays due to day activity, which is at the same time one of the lowest in Europe. To compare it with the average minutes of delays in Europe in 2018, the average number was 17,224 minutes. So to summarize, results of good agreements with close cooperation with military partners is essential. That's my personal point of view.
Thank you, Jacek. Speaking about civil-military CDM, that's a topic we heard several times during our discussions today, and also in the context of increasing needs to support sustainable aviation operations. I would like to ask Christophe about his opinion on how could civil-military collaborative decision-making help to support the sustainability requirements and specifically, let's say, technical level to save fuel for the civil traffic.
Thank you, Remus, for this. Nice questions.
Yes.
A clear separation between two kinds of military missions. The first one are the real security mission or the major exercises. They must have the highest priority and cannot be challenged by a commercial activity. Saying that, all the defense and security missions cannot also be considered like strategic, and adaptation must be possible for them. So in France, what is very nice, and I think it's the most important topic, we have a political agreement, which is called Accord Cadre Défense Transport, which is signed by 3 ministers every 5 years. And it clear guidance to all the stakeholders in France of how the civil-military cooperation is working. In this document, for example, the first line is that the military missions must be tackled as a priority. The second one, we must have, as military, civil aviation to tackle the growth of the traffic. And third, we have to go into a green aviation world to be more sustainable. And when you have these 3 priorities given by the ministry, all the other layers that are working as strategic, operative, pre-tactical, tactical level have to comply with. And so it's very important. After, when we have this clear, we can go further. You know that you have the flexible use of airspace concept. We can work on it and we can go further. For example, we have a kind of automation. We have developed a concept which is called traffic light scheme concept. That means that we are managing our military areas in regard to the peak of the traffic flows, and with an automation way of working. That means on different routes that are crossing military aviation, we have determined with the civil partners a kind of threshold, 45 aircraft per hour, for example. And when this threshold is overloaded, there is a kind of priority given to the civilian. That means then a military activity can be stopped for 1 or 2 hours to give the way to the civilian flows. And automatically is decided at strategic level, and there's no more CDM process behind. And we have this kind of agreement on 3 big areas in France, the 3 most used areas. It's TRA 200 in Northeast, TRA 10 and TRA 30 sort in the southwest part of France. And it's worked very well. And this process, for example, is worked 3 or 4 times per day. And it helps really the civil aviation. And we have to go in this way. We cannot work in our world. We cannot work in the civilian world. It's really a consensus and agreed at the most highest level.
Thank you very much, Christophe. Just to continue with this, what do you think that the military could do for their specific military operations? Is there something that the military could do to support sustainability in aviation? Let's say if you have a look to both ground and airborne elements. Is there something ongoing on the military side for sustainability?
For France, honestly, I think that we have to we face a ceiling of glass. We are working in close cooperation since 20 years now with our civil partners, and we can still fine-tune some area that we cannot go further. What is important, we have adapted the concept of advanced flexible use of airspace in some conditions. It was created in 2015, and we have worked on all our areas in this variable geographic area concept. That means that we have cut small pieces in all areas, and when there is a civil need, we can work and manage our area in a dynamic way. When there is a need, we can cut apart, east, west part, etc. So that we must create at strategic level the conditions for the flexibility and the predictability for the civil. And also we must comply what we call in France is the just need culture. Roughly, the difference between the airspace loose plan at day -1 and the daily operation is roughly, we have an efficiency of more than 80%. That means that what we are requiring day -1 is used and shared at the last moment. And that gives predictabilities for the airliners to fulfill their planes and the flight plans, etc. And we have to comply with this.
Thank you, Christophe. We have heard these practices in France concerning the advanced flexible use of airspace. I have also heard Jacek talking about advanced flexible use of airspace. So Jacek, could you please share with us in the same manner as Christophe, if you have some differences in the innovative way that you implement the advanced flexible use of airspace in Poland this time?
Okay, so thank you, Remus. So I try to improvise then. So I already mentioned about it, but we implemented flexible use of airspace in whole FIR, meaning in upper and lower airspace, in controlled and uncontrolled airspace, which is quite innovative and really help us to offer all the airspace user one source of information regarding all the restrictions of temporary nature, as well as I mentioned. And it is very appreciated by all the aviation society that it's easy for them to find in one place all the information about the FUA areas, I would say, being available in one place instead of searching the NOTAMs and blah blah blah. Okay, what we have done just recently, coming from advanced FUA, we have implemented the new airspace structures, which is, I also already mentioned about them. These are non-standard planning zones, which are not really airspace structures like TSA, TRA, but they are rather areas dedicated for isolating the air traffic flows, which might be conflicted somehow with the military activity, or just to implement them to help for the ATC services to do their job. Also, next year, at the beginning of next year, we are trying to implement another idea called ASM scenarios. So this is a new technology of cooperation between airspace management and air traffic and flow and capacity management to do better their job. So meaning, taking into account all the potential obstacles for capacity before final allocation of airspace structures requested by the military colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacek. That was a very in-deep improvisation, I can say. Yeah.
One more comment together with you, Remus, not to forget, we are working right now under the umbrella of CSAR on the new type of areas for the profits for both and civil military side, hopefully so-called dynamic mobile areas to make the FUA process even more flexible than it was ever before.
Indeed, that's about innovation, and at least me, I like very much these two perspectives, which shows that advancing with the flexible use of airspace needs first to be very efficient in using what you have as political guidance and airspace design, and then to try to innovate towards what you call Jacek, ad hoc airspaces and more dynamicity in information exchanges. Switching about from these very technical aspects related to the usage of airspace to the basis of FUA, at least in Europe, as we know, the basis to ensure harmonization of implementation of the concept amongst European countries is the regulation. And we have an FUA regulation in place, highlighted by Ray since 2005. And I have a two-folded question here for you, Ray. First of all, somebody is asking us whether there is a need for legislation in order to implement the concept of flexible use of airspace, or it's enough to have ICAO convention and SARPs in order to start working with the FUA. And the second question is whether with these advancements envisaged for the flexible use of airspace concept, if there is a need to adapt the regulation, to improve the regulation, and if yes, how do you think that we should proceed to adapt the regulation in Europe, I mean?
Okay, there's a lot of questions in there, I think, more than two. But in any case, I think kind of, I'm reminded many years ago, kind of when I was at school, we all had very basic, or I had a very basic computer, but somebody had a more basic computer than mine. And his comment was, I will not change my computer until I have taken full advantage of all its capability. And I think kind of there is an aspect there that we can focus on making the airspace available, or we can focus on regulation, but we have to also focus, and I think it's perhaps more important to focus on behavior, and also to ensure that any barriers that we have to using the system that we have designed already are removed. Because we're finding, like, kind of, for example, two items that could be quite usefully taken into account is that in some cases regulators may prevent their AOC holders from taking advantage of FUA because it means flying a flight that hasn't been planned, for example. Another aspect that might bear consideration is that in many cases the aircraft operators have pointed out that in terms of the ability to take up the flexibilities that are currently provided by flexible use of airspace, they would need more people in the ops room. But then they point out that if they had more people in the ops room, the chances are those people would be put into focusing on the firefighting operations of those critical flights that may result in being stranded at an airport because an aircrew have gone out of CDP or whatever. So there was a real sort of question about kind of how you'd actually take full advantage of what is currently on offer. So I would caution against the idea of going down the regulatory route instantly and saying that, yeah, if we change X, Y, and Z, we will get positive changes in behavior and will remove all those barriers to using the airspace. And I suppose kind of allied to that, one comment which was really quite interesting was that, and it was well agreed, that if everybody started using FUA as it is actually designed at the moment, the NM systems probably would not be able to cope with the dynamicity of the data. There'd not be enough static flight plans in the system to ensure that kind of that information could be matched and assessed. And that's quite an interesting one. And I think if we look back into Summer Gone, which I suppose has been quite successful from an NM point of view, we will have seen that kind of the NM requested that aircraft operators would actually file 6 hours in advance, which effectively means that procedure 3 couldn't actually be used, which is already kind of incorporated within our regulatory system. So effectively, I would say that yes, there may be scope for change in regulation, but I think we have to understand what the current regulation is capable of, why it's not operating at an optimum level, and what are the barriers to using the flexibilities that we've put into the system through that regulation? Thanks.
Thanks, Ray. I think you have answered all the elements of the multiple folded questions. And indeed, what I take from you is that you don't really should need for a regulation. You need to act when you want to be effective with the flexible use of airspace. And speaking about INM, you also mentioned INM, and we have also some questions about INM and about how digitalization of information exchanges among civil and military ATM systems is needed. We know that you are working on requirements. We are working developing the ASM systems in Europe, Alvaro, and I would like you to develop a bit on these developments, develop a bit on what means ASM SWIM. How could that help our stakeholders to better manage the airspace?
Well, today we have already addressed many topics that at the end translate into system requirements. I noted a few. I noted that we address flexibility, collaborative decision-making, advanced data exchanges, real-time data. So at the end, this is nothing more than connected systems together. So states are heavily encouraged by European regulation, at least here in Europe, to implement a better civil-military cooperation. We also discuss requirements due to the growing need for airspace access and also due to the operational flexibility to get the airspace. In addition, we have the Green Deal set by EU, where the decarbonization objectives require close collaboration across all the actors in the network. Of course, we are also in a time where major investments are done both on the civil and on the military side on new ATM systems, for which interoperability is key. Coordination is just not possible if we don't have real-time and accurate data. However, we must note, especially on the military side, that many of the technologies which are currently used on the civil side, such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, or cloud-based infrastructure, may not be applicable for the military. Because military have particular requirements due to the nature of military operations and national defense. For instance, we can talk about resilience, which for security and defense, that means that ATM systems must be built on from the beginning with contingency in mind. Another topic which is also important to address is sensitivity of the data, given that the military data is generally considered sensitive and often it's confidential, not only during the crisis situation, but also during peacetime operations. Something important also to mention is infrastructure, because today military ATM systems are mainly deployed on segregated infrastructure, which is totally isolated, and that poses unique challenges when connecting with the civil ATM systems, especially when many of the civil infrastructure is being virtualized or put onto the cloud. One of the key topics that most of you are aware of today is cybersecurity. We cannot ensure that confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information are ensured and secured for military operations if we are not able to establish a cybersecurity framework, but at the basic level, and then to start building based on that. Today, we have digital solutions in place like ADSP, data link, or SWIM that can be considered vulnerable to data corruption, to data injection, to attacks on key infrastructure. That's why we have to put the two worlds together and try to come with a compromise, of course, meeting the requirements of both civil and military partners. But if we manage to do that, and if we achieve our objectives, then digitalization can be a key enabler for many areas. For instance, we can talk about airspace deconfliction, airspace control in crisis zones, air defense mission, including the new entrants, high altitude operations, space launches, search and rescue, for instance. And one of the topics, I would like now to address the second part of your question about what is the ASM SWIM. One of the topics that we are currently working on here at EUROCONTROL with the nations is the SWIM implementation. SWIM, the System-Wide Information Management, It's an aviation concept that was introduced by ICAO and is reflected in the Global Air Navigation Plan. It is enhancing the sharing of information and data with the global aviation system. While from the beginning, at the design point, primary target civil aviation, SWIM is being more and more exploited in all the areas, and it's also touching military aviation. It's not really a new concept, since we have been talking about SWIM for more than 10 years now. And the network manager at EUROCONTROL was a pioneer on the SWIM deployment with the business-to-business, the NB2B services, which are used today extensively, not only by NSPs, but also by CFSPs, airlines, aircraft operators. Today, we have a mandate by European Regulation Common Project 1, which mandates the states to implement SWIM. Air navigation service providers, the military organizations, the airspace users, and the airports are deploying the SWIM services in various information domains, such as aeronautical information management for digital NOTAMs, FFIs for 4D trajectory, meteorological information, or at airports for collaborative decision-making, ACDM. However, we also must consider that in some cases, the military will be the sole provider of services. For instance, that will be the case in some states for AIS or MET, or even for US-based services. Particularly if we think about ASM SWIM is part of an overall project, which is called the Clean ATM project. This is a global initiative that was selected last year as one of the main transport projects to receive EU funding via the CEF, the Connecting Europe Facility of the European Union, which is the main instrument supporting the strategic transport investment in the European Union. The Clean ATM project was selected to accelerate the adoption of the Common Project 1 regulation. That's why you see here in Europe, we have close collaboration between regulation and implementation deployment. This is coordinated by the CESAR deployment manager. One of the key priorities of CP1 is what's so-called the ATM family number 5, which is the adoption of SWIM in key priority areas. That's why the ASM project, as a multi-stakeholder, counting with 18 members, is working together to enable SWIM exchanges in the ASM world domain. So we are talking about airspace management digitalized via SWIM services. The main objective, of course, is to ensure interoperability across not only ASM support systems, but also between airspace management support systems and air traffic control systems. Doing so, we will achieve real-time exchanges of airspace reservation and activation data. So it means that the whole pre-tactical and tactical levels of the airspace management process will be covered by SWIM exchange, ensuring interoperability across systems. This will enhance the flight safety, it will improve the civil-military tactical coordination, and it will facilitate cross-border operations that we see it's a requirement for future operations of advanced fighters in the future. ASM SWIM is one of the projects which highlights the relevance of interoperability between the civil and the military systems. It brings overall benefit to the whole ATM network, and it shows the relevance of EU funding, improving the European infrastructure. I hand over to you, back to Remus.
Thank you very much, Alvaro, for these very detailed explanations about the future of ASM system support development. We have another question about CESAR, and it's not really a question about content development there, but it's a question about military involvement in CESAR and the state willingness to support further improvement of FUA throughout research and innovation. And I think I can try to answer this question myself as being heavily involved in CESAR. And yes, to me, the states are very willing to assure that the military experts are directly involved in research and innovation. And the aim is twofold here. So first, to make sure that throughout military participation, ATM system overall can evolve towards meeting the performance requirements set by the Single European Sky program. And second aspect, critical this time to military, is to make sure that any ATM development is safeguarding and even more is supporting effectiveness of military mission in the future ATM environment. We have a very practical program set up at Eurocontrol level. We call it MEPS. This is the Military Engagement Plan for CESAR, which provides each and every member state the possibility to be engaged in this program, of course, based on the assessments done by the parent working arrangements, civil-military collaborative working arrangements, military working arrangements hosted by Eurocontrol. So there is some sort of strategic guidance coming from the military aviation authorities, which identifies what are the priorities to be followed by the military throughout the innovation program. And then we have this level down enabler, the MEPS program, which allows the states to directly participate with military experts in the CESAR developments. All in one, I think that we have a good collaboration. We have a good mix of experts, especially when we talk about CESAR 3 developments. We have, even for the very first time, a project which is addressing a flagship of CESAR, and the flagship is civil-military cooperation and interoperability. So it's a very important step towards the development of civil-military cooperation. It's a very important step to strengthen the bonds of civil and militaries in identifying innovative solutions, and specifically to us to advance with the flexible use of airspace. I think that I will pick up only one last question, which is related to the harmonization of military inputs to the ATM network. So there are hard military requirements on one side, which will definitely put a lot of pressure on the airspace management processes and on the network management processes for the traffic flow management. But also there is a hard requirement to the military to ensure that at least they are willing to share information with the network, to ensure that a level of predictability we were discussing here in a harmonized manner, in order to help alleviation of ATM issues, especially within the European airspace. And the topic here is about the improved and initial OAT flight plan, which is now in the implementation phase within a pilot project initially, which covers basically 3 states at this moment. And the question, I think, goes to Christophe, whether you can sorry, if you can elaborate a bit on how do you see the development of this IOAT flight plan, and especially a harmonized approach to sharing information from the military with the network manager.
Thank you, Remus. In any case, we have no problem to share the information with the rest of the world. For some, like said Alvaro, we have some sensitive topics, but there are very few ones, and the rest of the world, I consider the ATM world like a single one. There is no civil world and the military world. We have to work together. I take just a small example. For the surveillance mission, we are picking from the civilian side all the radar screens, the radar shots, and also the flight plans. If we have not this information via, in the future, the SWIM project, we cannot continue our mission. So the share of the information is important. In the future, share the information are made at strategic level. For 6 months between before a big event, I send you each time a nice document to give you the information in advance. It feeds the rolling, the seasonal NOP, which is released every Friday. And in the future, we have to continue to share all the information at non-real time. It's more the AUP, EUP world, but also in the real time to share routines information. The only topic is, like I said, Alvaro, there is we have a problem with the cyber threats for the moment. So we are working to develop perhaps a dedicated pillar on the SWIM, which is the green profile, which is really will be dedicated to the military, but it will only color a few parts of our exchanging. For the rest of the world, when we fulfill a flight plan, etc., it will work. For the more specific IOAT part, it's very important for us because we want to share this information, not only because we want to be transparent, because it's a need for us. For the moment, in some times you are working like in the 19th century. That means that the flight plan is fulfilled by one system, a guy or a lady is taking over, it is fulfilling a second flight plan on a second system, etc. And in the future, with all this system and the IoT flight plan concept, it will be taken automatically from the pilot and goes directly to our military system, to the civilian system. There's a share of the information for all the stakeholders, also for the civilian. For the moment, for a civil ACC in France, when they want to see the military flight plans, they have to enter it in the system manually. It's not efficient. And in the future, all this information will be shared. It's that for that reason that France is very involved in this IoT trial, which begins in January.
Thank you very much, Christophe. I see Ray agrees with you. However, Ray, if you have anything else to add, please.
I think what's quite useful to come back again, kind of when we're looking at the developments in FUA and the technology, as Alvaro was discussing about, I think we should focus in also on the civil technology. And I think one party to the flexible use of airspace that we haven't mentioned so far are the computer flight plan service providers, and the three-way relationship in terms of how airspace is ingested in the airline or the aircraft operator, which is normally through the CFSP and the NM. And effectively, it's really important that we get to a point where the NM, CFSP and aircraft operator are communicating on the same level, using the same data, using the same protocols to ensure that the data that when the product of FUA is provided and the airspace is made available, that data can be ingested into the CFSP systems seamlessly and provide useful benefits to the airspace provider. And for example, some of the problems that we have seen is that, for example, some CFSPs may be operating on a different version of AXN than the NM. That will cause a problem. There are often situations, and I think we will have solved a lot of the problems if we can ensure that a flight plan proposed by the network manager or a reroute proposed by a network manager is not rejected by the aircraft operator because as being unviable, or indeed that an aircraft operator's plan that has been presented to the network manager also isn't rejected because it's unviable, because that's an indication that the systems aren't aligned. And it's really important that alignment occurs, and possibly this will be achieved through proper post-operational analysis, perhaps involving NM, the operator, and the CFSP. I think that will be a key to ensuring that the airspace itself is used flexibly, and with the emphasis on the word used.
Thank you very much, Ray, and thank you very much, dear speakers, for your contribution today. Just to close this session and to wrap up a bit with regards to what can we take away from the discussions today on the way to enhance civil-military cooperation. From an FUA perspective, it is very clear that we need to understand very well first what will be the military mission requirements to use the airspace in the future, coming from the new generation of fighters, coming from the new tactics they are going to use to fully implement the capabilities provided by the new platforms. And then we need to identify solutions to be dynamic, to be flexible, and why not, as Jacek mentioned, to be innovative, even to improvise. And I think that the approach should start by assessing what is currently existing and to optimize the usage of existing procedures, existing airspace structures, and then to further proceed with innovation integration gradually into the civil-military cooperation processes. Yes, system support is necessary. The military need to keep the pace in both operational but also technical domains with the evolution of technology in general in air traffic management and especially in airspace management, so that to ensure the required interoperability levels. Thank you very much again, and please allow me to thank also our audience for their very proactive participation, for their questions that enabled us to have a very interesting discussion today and a very interactive one. Again, thank you very much, everybody, and wish you a very nice good afternoon and also very nice weekend. Goodbye.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.